All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in tonight. I'm going to get things started. My name is Kevin. I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's Books. And before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. And if you don't already do so, please follow us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Tonight, we are very excited to welcome Sallie Tisdale in conversation with Bernard Cooper. Sallie Tisdale is the author of many books, including the acclaimed Advice for Future Corpses and Those Who Love Them. Her new book, The Lie About the Truck, Survivor, Reality TV, and the Endless Gaze, an insightful exploration of reality TV and the shifting definitions of truth in America. In a world of fake news and rampant conspiracy theories, the nature of truth is increasingly blurry borders, and it's hard to tell what the truth is. In her clever and timely cultural commentary, Tisdale tackles this issue by framing it in a familiar way, reality TV, particularly the long-running CBS show Survivor. With humor and in-depth superfan analysis, Tisdale explores the distinction between suspended disbelief and true authenticity, both in how we watch shows like Survivor and in how we perceive the world around us. Sallie is joining us tonight right here in Portland, Oregon. Sallie is joined in conversation by Bernard Cooper. Bernard is an artist and the author of 6 books, including My Avant-Garde Education. He's been the recipient of many awards, including an O. Henry Prize, a Guggenheim Grant, and a National Endowment of the Arts Fellowship in Literature. And he's joining us tonight from Los Angeles. This evening's event will include an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. And if someone has typed a question that you'd like to know the answer to, you can even upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, please support Sallie and Powell's by purchasing a copy of her new book from us. A link to buy The Lie About the Truck, as well as a link to buy Bernard's books, will be shared in the chat a couple of times this evening. Sallie, Bernard, we're thrilled to welcome you both this evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Kevin. That was a wonderful summation of Sallie's book. So I'm so happy to be here tonight with Sallie Tisdale. I've known Sallie for a long time, and one of the many things I admire about her writing and about her as a person is her infinite curiosity. And one of the things I love in my phone conversations with Sallie is asking her what she's working on. And I'm always surprised about the subjects that haunt or obsess or concern her. And she bases books on these areas of interest that make them far more rich and delicious than one might at first suppose. For example, a book about the history of salt, or about nursing, or about the sex industry. And when I first asked Sallie what she was working on, she told me she was working on a book that was based on the television show Survivor, which stunned me. I didn't know she was a fan. I, who have never watched Survivor, was completely immersed and delighted by this book. So it's not only a book for fans of Survivor, but about people. It's a book for people who are interested in media, what kind of reality TV is comprised of, where one draws the line between fiction and fact. And it's filled with fascinating cultural analysis. Sallie has said that the book has 2 kind of focal points. One is describing the show itself, and the other is analyzing what's being described. And Sallie's going to begin by reading something, a short excerpt that is based on a particular episode itself. So.
Okay. Well, and I have to say, I'm not a super fan. Super fans are so much more granular than me. You would not believe it. I am fascinated by the degree of passion and detailed analysis that fans of the show engage in. It's startling, actually. I can't even remember the names of the players from week to week sometimes. And super fans can recite dialogue from 16 years ago on short notice. So anyway,
You know,
I'm
I wanted to
an amateur. I'm an amateur super fan.
I wanted to say, Sallie, that one of the things that was so eye-opening about this book is to read about all the blogs and the controversies and the memes and the stories that are generated by fans and participants. And I felt that this entire universe was opening up to me as a reader.
Well, and you know, there's over 700 reality shows being filmed right now around the world. They're in every country and every culture and every language. And every show has a fan base, and every fan base has a strong social media presence. But Survivor is really kind of the granddaddy of reality television in a lot of ways. And so its fan base is the most entrenched, foundational, and sophisticated that you'll come across. So anyway, I'm going to just read. This is from the chapter called Losers, or The Thinking Seat. In the opening moments of season 10 on Palau, the contestants struggle to get their boat to shore. Wanda Shirk, a 55-year-old English teacher from Pennsylvania, stands up in the stern and begins to sing. She's written a lot of songs about Survivor, and she wants the game to be a big party as long as it lasts. Willard Smith, a lawyer from Washington, later says, "We're sitting there, it's a really hot day, rowing the boat, and this lunatic jumps up and starts singing songs. I wanted to knock her off with the oar." Such is the loser edit, what Colson Whitehead calls the plausible argument of failure. When a tribe loses an immunity challenge, the film shifts into slow motion close-ups of their disappointed faces, because this is war and they lost, because they are losers. Certain players are doomed to perform personality deficits, episode after episode, wrote Whitehead. It has been written by fate or the producers. Pick your deity. There are a lot more ways to lose Survivor than to win. Far more ways. Getting angry, gloating, whining, saying you're tired, saying you don't feel good, saying you're lonely. Choosing to have your bowel movement in the shallow water by camp on the first day, as Darnell did in Cow Wrong. If you want to win, don't talk all the time. Don't be too loud. Never say, "I'm in control of this game." Don't act paranoid. Don't start a romance. Never say you are the weak link. Don't share your hard luck story. Don't be too confident, and never predict you will win. I was counting my million, says Boo on Fiji. Oops. You will lose for not working, and for working too hard, and for asking others to work, and for not doing the specific work that others want you to do without being asked. You lose for complaining. You lose for not sharing your complaints. You lose for being sensitive. You lose for being insensitive. You lose for getting emotional, and you lose for being stoic. Don't be annoying. Such a simple, obvious rule, so often broken. Don't be a smartass, and never sing show tunes. Toby said, "At first I thought, oh, that's so cute. Look, Wanda's singing, and oh goodness, she kept going and going and going, and everybody's just like, is she going to stop?" Wanda was voted off as soon as they reached the beach.
There's so many things I love about that passage. And one of them is the way it conveys the necessity for duplicity. among the players. And you talk a lot about people deceiving others to get ahead, and also saying quite frequently, I swear that I'm telling the truth when they're not telling the truth, etc. And you really are able to open this kind of hall of mirrors when you have excerpts from the episodes that really call into question truth and reality. And it's one of the strengths of the book, I think.
So, the weird thing about Survivor is they claim, the people who created the show, the producers, claim that it was supposed to be about a blank slate and creating a new society and people coming to work together and create this kind of Eden, the simplicity of an island life. There's all kinds of that stuff about the first season, much of it written by Mark Burnett, who we now know as the producer of The Apprentice and the primary responsibility for Donald Trump's success. So he has a lot to answer for, but that's one of the things he has to answer for, is this false idea that Survivor would be about creating a utopia. But the rules are that every 3 days you vote somebody out and only one person can survive. So how do you create a utopia that is dependent on execution, on regular execution? You have to work together until you can't work together anymore. So the fact is, the show is completely dependent on deceit and lying and false promises. And I love, like you said, these endless pinky swears. I swear on my child's grave. I swear on my mother. I swear on my police badge. And people fall for it over and over. It's almost like the show performs for us what we wish was true, but you can't create any competition that has only one winner and then assume that nobody's going to try their hardest to get there. So it's this very false image and dichotomy that they started with. Now the show is transparently and explicitly about how well you can get away with deceiving people and how you can deceive people without making them too angry at you.
Right. So one of the things I want to mention to the people who are watching is that something that is so wonderful about this book is the idea that the writer has a critical viewpoint, but also clearly enjoys watching the show. And those two things are always, in balance somehow. So it's filled with a kind of fascination and affection without, as Sallie said, being a super fan, but it also looks very critically and analytically about what is going on and what the show says about our culture.
Well, I was watching the show before I decided to write this. And one reason I wanted to write this is that I found myself wanting to be persuaded, willing to be manipulated by the show, knowing better. At first I just sort of fooled myself into thinking it wasn't curated and edited to create a story. It was real. And it's why we love the idea of reality television, because we persuade ourselves into thinking that we're seeing people as they really are, and that we have, I think it's very similar to pornography in a lot of ways, in that it's a way of pretending that we're seeing something we wouldn't get to see otherwise, that we're getting to see this private experience that we wouldn't get to see otherwise. And we just pretend it's not scripted. We pretend it's real. And we do that quite consciously and willingly. I have been a reader since I barely could walk, and stories in any form I just love, and I'm willing to submit to story pretty easily to all kinds of stories. So as I was watching Survivor, I was really aware that I was was choosing not to know some of what there was behind the scenes. I didn't want the fourth wall to break. I didn't want them to intrude. I wanted to go on that ride and pretend that these were people as they really are. Investigating the show and investigating how reality television works, I lost a little bit of that glow. It's a little bit harder to submit now, but I do still enjoy the script that I'm watching. It is a story. It's a created story, but I like it.
You know, another thing it's funny that you chose to read that passage, because it was a passage I marked as something I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay.
And one of the things that struck me about it, you mentioned Mark Burnett, who was mentioned a few times in this, but that the sort of abhorrence of being a loser, of doing anything one can not to be in the camp of the losers, so reminded me of Trump's idea that anyone who didn't have, mega success was a loser, that a loser was the worst thing a person could be.
Right. And we see this continuing to play out. He's a loser, and it's the most painful experience of his life. I think, maybe can't accept it. And on Survivor, you watch people so shocked when they're voted out and so hurt. I mean, sometimes people are just, their feelings are terribly hurt. Sometimes they're very angry, but they can't believe this is happening. And one of the things I object to about the show, about the world, is the fact that this is capitalism at its best. Most of the players are working class or middle class people. They're never going to get $1 million any other way. And it's your basic gladiator story. They're put into the ring while the rest of us watch them kill each other. And people will often say on the show that this is their chance to send their kids to college. This is their chance to retire. This is their chance to take care of their parents. And when they lose immunity or something, they'll say, I've thrown it all away. I can't believe I destroyed my family's dream. And it's like, wait a minute, this whole thing is totally set up. And as I say in the book, I don't really blame Survivor for that. I do blame the market economy for that. I blame global capitalism for that, for creating an underclass which is perpetually trying to find that golden ring.
Something that I think is a very nuanced success in this book is that it has political concerns, but it is never sort of didactic. It never scolds anybody. It just acknowledges the kinds of things that you're talking about, the show's relationship to capitalism and to Trump, etc.
I think I do scold Mark Burnett. Well, I make fun of Mark Burnett, to be honest. He's a remarkable man because he is a self-made billionaire. Okay. And he's been all over the world, in all kinds of places, and he just acts like a yokel. He says things that are so remarkably naive and silly, and I don't get this guy. And his ship is sinking along with Trump's. So it frames that too.
Yeah, it didn't seem like scolding to me. I mean, it was wry, but it still seemed compassionate. There are other things that you are able to make links to. You talked about Mark Burnett traveling all over the globe, and Survivor, of course, travels the globe too. And there are some aspects of the book that address ecotourism and what happens to the sites where they're filming after the contestants and the crew leave. I was wondering if you would talk about that a little bit.
Well, so you have to remember that there's Survivor, the American version, it's all owned by something called Castaway Productions, which is based in England, in the UK, and they franchise Survivor all around the world. So you can watch Survivor in Hebrew, you can watch it in French, you can watch it in, it's been in Bulgaria and Brazil and all, and you'll see the same tropes. You see the same kinds of challenges, you see the same kind of tribal council, you see the buffs, you see the idols. It's quite recognizable because Castaway Productions requires that. I think the music is better in many other countries, but I have watched the show in several languages and I don't need to speak the language to know what's going on because the tropes are the same, but they're not all policed the same. And other countries have been really taken to task, other productions, for ecological damage. Some of them have showed up at the same sites year after year and used them over and over and just left a real mess behind. Supposedly the United States, the American version, has the best reputation, but there is some evidence that they haven't always cleaned up. More disturbing to me is the destruction that happens before the show. The show has to present this image of an untamed wilderness, of being a castaway in a desert island with few resources. So these are actually inhabited places where they're filming. So in more than one case, in a number of cases, they've moved people off their land, they've taken down fences, torn out docks, even destroyed houses. And people are so quote unquote compensated, but sometimes they're being taken off their ancestral lands. And they may not, I don't know, nobody says, do they ever get to go back? Is it ever the same? Is that compensation adequate? CBS is extremely closed-mouthed and extremely litigious about the show. And as I note in the book, I hedge in several places because the publisher's lawyers insisted that I hedge, because CBS is known for suing people around the show repeatedly. So how much damage has really been done, we don't really know, but they definitely have a big impact where they are. Right. Now they're lodged in Fiji now. They say Fiji's got everything they want. Supposedly the Fijian government loves them, but I really wonder, what if the local people really say to each other? I'll never know. Nobody's ever going to know except the locals what they say to each other about Survivor. I just wish I could hear it.
Interesting. So as I hope we've made clear, the book, although it's about specific episodes and about a specific show, it also is constantly aware of larger issues. We just talked a little bit about ecology and global tourism. Something else that seems to really interest you in this book too is this idea of living in a kind of universe of constant surveillance, of people being watched, of watching other people, etc. I wonder if you would talk about that a bit.
Well, and so I have to, my bona fides are that I'm not in that culture as much as I can avoid it. Here I am on Zoom and it's going to go on YouTube. Not my choice. I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter. And I don't really understand why you would want to be, because I value my privacy. I value the interaction that I choose to have with other people. And I don't want to be behind a screen. Like we were saying before the show started, we're both introverts. We like to be alone a lot. We sort of rejuvenate ourselves by being alone. But I'm also, and have always been, concerned with, what does it mean to authentically show up, to really be authentic with another person? And I think we're often behind a veneer. So to put the camera between us, as people seem to do more and more and more, just makes that experience harder. There is this odd distancing that we experience. I don't know where it's going to end.
Now, when you watch the show, is there some part of you that's measuring how authentic or real people's showing of emotions is? Do you ever think that it's part of some manipulation? Do you feel moved when it impresses you as being more serious, etc.?
Well, no, I'm impressed by the gameplay
Mm,
because, now I've seen all these behind the scenes photographs and I realize that when you see two people in an intense conversation, there are cameras literally this close to them. And there's somebody holding a reflector in front of them and there's a microphone up here. I mean, they look like they're all alone on the beach. The show's editing is amazing. The impression of isolation is very well done, but they're completely surrounded by people all the time. They're never, hardly ever alone at all. So those interactions, when it's two people being filmed and the cameras are right there, I don't trust anything I see. Although I think some of it is genuine. People do get caught up and they get angry and they say things and they reveal things they don't intend to reveal. But the other step then is that people do what's called confessionals. So they're taken away by themselves with a producer and cameras and reflectors, and they drop the mask and say what they really, really mean. I think those are actually pretty genuine because a lot of stuff comes out in the confessionals, and many people show a completely different face in the confessional, and they explain their strategy and why they're behaving this way and what they're really planning to do. You could see people practice their crocodile tears and so on. But I also remember there's cameras there. There's a whole other layer. Hundreds of hours end up on the cutting room floor. So what I'm actually seeing is the 3 minutes that survived a 4-hour interview. So that's not genuine. That's not in the least bit authentic. And then it's put together on a screen that I'm in front of and I'm editing it. And then after the show's over, the fans go crazy and start analyzing all of the edited false material that they've just ingested. So there's like layer after layer after layer of separation and storytelling that goes on. Is any of it real? Part of me would say it's all real because this is what we do as people.
right.
We create layers of story.
So a friend of mine is a producer on a reality TV show and has talked to me about the incredible overabundance of film, used to follow somebody collecting firewood, say. I mean, hours and hours and hours. And then all of that material, somebody has to find the story in it. Somebody has to edit it to sort of propel a certain narrative and not another. So it seems that there is an element of fabrication in this reality TV show and others.
Right.
I was wondering if you find any similarities in that kind of shady area between reality TV and sort of fiction or edited story and in nonfiction writing itself.
Well, you and I know that if you're successful as a writer, it's going to look easy. It should read as easy to the reader. I sometimes read books that I think they're very well written, but I can see the machinery. I can hear the creaking of the machinery. And even though it's beautiful language, it's not free, it's not relaxed. Really good writing doesn't call attention to itself. It pulls you in, so sometimes it's going to be beautiful, but beautiful in a way that brings pictures to your mind, not attention to the words. So you and I are also engaged in this process all the time, and you're a painter. So you're also, every line, every color choice, it should appear artless on the page or on the canvas, but it's very, who knows how many hours go into that line, right?
Right. The amount of deliberation that goes into making something look spontaneous.
Right.
Is
And it's the same with dance. It's the same with music. It's the same with theater. It's the same. And I think to some extent, it's this is what I'm saying about presentation and authenticity. Is I think some of it's the same when we just get together to have coffee. There is still, in most relationships, a degree of defendedness and fearfulness of rejection. And it's a fundamental human fear that we're not worthy, or we won't be loved, or we will be rejected. And we do edit ourselves all the time to protect that. So I think a lot of what we're seeing with reality television is just a logical end game to some of the creation of film in the first place.
Right. And it seems that you're also saying that there's some editing and wishful thinking and fictionalizing that goes into all self-presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even when you're alone in a room with somebody else.
And if you've ever met a person who doesn't do any self-editing, you're going to shy away a little bit, because the unedited self is not necessarily a good social self at all. So how do we become truly seen by each other? I believe that it's one of our deepest longings is to be truly seen as we are and accepted as we are. It's a very deep longing that who I am, and I am loved, or I am accepted. And yet it's the hardest thing we do, to let somebody see us.
Right.
It's kind of the heart of love, is if you do see somebody truly as they are, I think your natural response is love, because there's a recognition of each other. Yeah. But I don't know that we're able to do that very often.
Right. I'm curious, in that you talk in the book and in this discussion a bit about the art of arranging a narrative that seems to closely resemble reality. Given that that's an important aspect of making a reality TV show, oh my God, I think I forgot the question I was going to ask.
Well, I have an answer anyway.
How great.
Because one of the significant tropes that Survivor brought to this genre, and that has continued into most reality shows, is this idea that anyone could win. That these are ordinary people and anyone could win. You could pluck 16 people off the street. They're a cross section of America, and any one of them could win. And Jeff Probst, the host, says that he wants everybody to have a winner's edit, which when I read that, I thought, fat chance. Some of these people are given a loser edit the first time you see them. There's, clearly not a lot of winner edits going on, but they want to promote this idea that anyone could win. But in fact, none of these people are ordinary, or they wouldn't have gone to the immense amount of trouble that it takes to get accepted and to go on Survivor. And I do go into that a lot in the book. How do you get on the show? What do you have, the contracts you have to sign, the effort you have to go through? That's not an ordinary person. And ordinary people are not this good at deceit. We're deceitful. Well, all of us are deceitful, but we're not always that good at it. And these people are really good at it. And the ability to have cameras like this and even breathe normally would be beyond me. So, and the players will tell you that. They'll say, yeah, they say we're all ordinary people, but we are not. We're crazy people. These are crazy people.
So what I was going to ask is that in that there's a certain, that there are winner edits and loser edits, and there's a certain amount of artifice going on. Is it hard to find footage or information about the show actually being filmed, or is there a lot of behind the scenes?
There's a lot of behind the scenes. There have been, the secrets have been let out. That, like I said, CBS is litigious, and the punishments are pretty onerous if you give away secrets. People have been sued and lost money for giving away secrets. But given that, CBS, after 21 years, has figured out that it's in their best interest to let some of this behind the scenes footage out. So they do it themselves. You can go on YouTube, you're on YouTube, go on YouTube and look up behind the scenes of Survivor, and you'll see all these photos of the crews setting things up, or photos of people filming the show. And so you can see some of that. Former players have told a lot of stories on the show. After 3 years, they're released from some of their cone of silence. It's a total cone of silence for 3 years. And then they can do interviews. And so I do quote a lot of veteran players talking about what it's really like, what their relationship with the crew was really like, what happened after they got home again, how the show affected their life, and so on. So, and of course, the show has created its own celebrities. So there are certain people that have come back to play over and over. They're known by a single name. You don't need to explain anything. The fans know who Tyson is. They know who Boston Rob is. They know who Parvati is. And they know their story, and they know their arc, and they know their, so it becomes a series of stories.
So I'm curious, if there is a 3-year cone of silence after a show is filmed, is there a cone of silence before a player goes to the location to play the game?
They have to sign a very draconian contract before they even audition in person. So you send in a tape and you fill out questionnaires, and then they say, we'd like to meet you. And at that point, they have to sign extremely strict contracts about secrecy. And the cone of silence is that they aren't even allowed to do interviews or any public events without permission for 3 years. They can't even cut the ribbon at a department store opening for 3 years. After 3 years, they can do interviews, but certain things you can never say for the rest of your life.
Wow.
The contract that you sign to be on Survivor gives away your likeness, your name, and your life story. These players can never write their own life story that includes Survivor. They can never write a memoir of Survivor. Wouldn't you think we'd have seen a bunch of them by now? That's why you've never seen one. And they can never give away production secrets or what went on behind the scenes. So you ask about behind the scenes. What we know, for the most part, is what CBS allows us to know.
Wow, interesting.
Somebody asked me recently, did I interview players for this show, for this book? And I was like, what would be the point of that? I would be hearing whatever I was expected to hear. They are extremely controlling. So.
Well, listen, would you read another excerpt? I would love to hear something else.
I'm gonna read a short, more of the thoughtful part.
Okay.
Oh, I can talk about the show forever. I love talking about the show. And the new season. We haven't even talked about the new season. Okay. The audience has no idea how accurate the aired footage is to the actual game. And except for a few tantalizing details, we'll never know. As I write this in the months after Trump left office, complaints about subjective editing seem odd. From controlled game shows to awards for structured reality, this is the story arc of our time. Reality television is partly about reality, after all, about how we perceive reality, just as it is partly about fantasy. Reality television is also about television as the primary mediator of shared reality, a source of dreams for the culture. If you don't believe this, you haven't been reading the news for years. The act of watching creates what is watched and then creates a world in which the watchers participate. We see ourselves mirrored and then enlarged in the act of watching. We do this all the time, of course. This is the work of memory for much of our lives. We look back and remember what happened and ask how, why. We sift through the raw material of our lives to find the logic in it, to find a line we can follow from then until now. Life is a tragedy and a comedy, a fool's comeuppance and a hero's quest. The producers edit the game in all kinds of ways to create a narrative. Jeff edits the story in real time by commenting on performance and asking extremely leading questions. I edit as I watch, turning toward one player, paying little attention to another. And I'm editing the way I write about the way I watch the show in an attempt to make you, reader, feel certain things or react to characters in a particular way, and especially so that you will like me. You will want me on your tribe. You can trust me, I swear.
I love the way I swear comes in, some distance away from where we've been told that people routinely say, I swear I'm telling the truth. That was such a great moment in the book. So it's so indicative of the skill in this book that you can write about survivor and yet also write something that is a beautiful and thoughtful description of writing itself, memoir writing in particular. And that's the kind of duality I loved in the book.
Thanks. Yeah, we're just about out of time. I know we're going to go to questions, but you're supposed to ask me what I'm working on now, right? One thing I've just started to work on is a particular memoir of childhood and teen years focused on all the lies that we're told when we're young. Some of them are inadvertent lies. We misunderstand things. Some of them are lies that our parents may really believe, and some of them are just outright lies. But children grow up believing all kinds of things that just aren't true. And I know I did. Family stories, ideas about history, weird, and then you grow up and you're like, wait a minute, what? That's not true.
Can you give an example? Because I certainly have one.
Well, and the name, I'm calling it Betrayal, a memoir, because it is a kind of betrayal, right? The big one that sort of is the core of this memoir is that we were told as children that we were related to some very famous people, that we were descended from some famous people, and they were part Indian. So we grew up believing that we were part Indian. And there's, my brother really looks Native American. And so we just assumed that was true. And it's totally false. We did our DNA a few years ago. He's Slavic is what he is. He has a lot of Russian in him. Where did that come from? There's no Russian stories in our history, but there's a lot of stories about famous Western explorers. So yeah, that was kind of the big lie, was that we grew up believing and preening ourselves for being descended from these famous people. And
for me, it was
not true.
For me, I was told by countless adults that as I grew older, things would become more and more clear.
That is the big betrayal, isn't it?
And I'm waiting for that to happen.
It's still possible, right? Yeah. Well, shall we pivot to questions or?
Sure.
Yeah, but that's
all
good.
Right. Yeah, I can answer or ask the questions for you. There's one question in the Q&A box. I want to remind the viewers that they can put their questions in the Q&A box for Sallie. And the first question we have is, and I think you addressed this a little bit just a second ago, but were there passages that you wrote that got nixed from the book for legal reasons?
Nothing was cut for legal reasons, but I had to hedge my language a lot. So like I would say, so-and-so was arrested for driving under the influence after the show. And I would have to say they were arrested for allegedly driving under the influence because I couldn't find the conviction, right? And I had, I had arguments with the lawyer, but she did kind of put the scare into me a little bit. So she made me go find sources for a bunch of things and prove that certain things had happened. Even though there were interviews on YouTube, for instance, of players saying certain things. She's like, are you sure they want this to be public? And I'm like, you just have no idea how public these people's lives are. There's seems to be nothing they won't say. So I just had to prove a lot of that to make sure the lawyer could live with it.
Gotcha. There was an interesting comment in the chat where someone stated that they think that Survivor is a horrible show with false values that can be misinterpreted by younger viewers. What do you think about that?
Well, so that's been said many times. Actually, there's a group that is basically Family Values Television, and they review television shows and tell parents whether they think these shows are good for children or not. They have always loved Survivor. These are conservative, socially conservative, family-oriented people, and they think Survivor's a great show for kids because it shows that you have to cooperate, and it shows beautiful natural places, and basically they're totally falling for the lie of Survivor on Family Values Television. Jeff Probst these days will say that it's great for kids because they can play along with the show. In fact, the current season has a rebus puzzle, an ongoing rebus puzzle, especially for children. And at some point during each episode, the camera pivots and shows this rebus puzzle because they're trying to get kids to watch the show. And they can go solve this puzzle and get prizes, right? And then he turns around and says, and you need to lie, cheat, and steal to win this game. So people seem to want to have it both ways, for sure. I mean, I think you're right in that the values of the show basically are lie, cheat, and steal so one person can get money because we don't give people enough money to live on. And, it in its simplest form, it's also continually doing a tremendous amount of cultural appropriation and as well as environmental damage. The show has a terrible history around race. The show has a long history around sexual harassment. I talk about all of these things. But what interests me is that I still like watching it. I like to watch old seasons. I still can let myself submit. And I think if we think about the stories that we love, we often do sort of agree to submit to the story.
That's a good answer. One thing that I'm curious about is there a correlation between reality TV and the way it's emerged and become so popular? Do you think it has any sort of influence on books and literature and memoir? And Bernard, you can even talk about this as well.
One of the reasons reality television is so popular is that it's cheaper to produce. It's not the audience that's driving some of this. I mean, obviously, if people didn't show up for it, they wouldn't keep making the shows, but it's a very easy way for a production company to make profits. So some of it is that simple. I don't know, sometimes I look at the bestseller list and I think, blah, dreck, I don't want to read any of these books. But if you go back and look at the bestseller list from 50 years ago and 100 years ago, there's a lot of dreck there too. And I read dreck. I love thrillers, and I don't really care if they're well written. And so like I say in the book, my taste is more broad than low, because I can defend a lot of the stuff that I like. Comic books, I love comic books, and I think they're very defensible. I don't know that it's I think you're probably referring to the fact that memoir has become basically unrefined confession to some degree. And I certainly can give a lecture about why that's not really memoir, and that memoir requires distance and objectivity and structure, and that artless ability to create an arc that we were talking about earlier, not just what was in my diary. That's not memoir. And so much of what is published is sort of it's not, it hasn't been discerned. It's not fully digested. And I wish that people would wait. Whenever I see a memoir by someone who's 23, I just think, well, no, not yet. Thanks. How about you, Bernard?
It's hard to describe this ineffable satisfaction I get from reading good memoir, but I don't get that from reality television. That I do feel that there is a far greater chance to get to the oddness of private experience through the voice of a writer, and be taken into the kind of intimate interior of their circumstances. I don't know if this is true about Survivor, but most reality shows at this point, they seem to generate so much screaming, so much conflict, and so much of the conflict is ginned out of nothing.
Right.
And that does not happen in the memoirs that
Right.
I admire. There are certainly conflicts, but it's not screaming. It's filtered, digested, as you said. It's a good memoirist, I think, often tries to figure out why people around them are behaving in the ways that they do. There's empathy. So it's a very different experience for me.
Well, right. I think Survivor is very, very well made. I want to make it it's not a reality show about nothing, which I could care less about these shows that are just slice of life, the Real Housewives kind of thing. Who cares? I don't want to spend a minute with those people. I like shows where problems are being solved and conflicts arise out of circumstances, are not just created. I think it's very well made, but it's like the Lee Child to Tolstoy. I think Lee Child's a terrific thriller writer, but he's not writing War and Peace. He knows what he's writing. He has a very particular effect he's going for. He's very good at getting it. So it's like Survivor versus The Sopranos, Lee Child versus, some of our better novelists. Why can't we have both? I read both.
All right, we have a question from the audience, and it says, Sallie, I'm wondering if you ever saw episodes of the series Unreal, which is a fictionalized behind the scenes story about how a show similar to The Bachelor or The Bachelorette is made. Have you seen that show?
Oh, I do remember that, but it kind of ended on a cliffhanger, and I don't think I ever saw the next season. I think I do remember that. Yes. I mentioned if you liked that, there's a show that you have to look hard for because it's a local show called The Show About the Show, which was made by a local television show in Brooklyn, a local television station in Brooklyn by a filmmaker in Brooklyn. And the show about the show is you're watching the editor and the producer and the camera people talk about making the show. And then you watch them rehearse having a conversation about talking about the show. And then you watch them argue about the rehearsal. And then you watch them in the mirror rehearsing the argument. And then the next episode is talking about what happened when they made that first episode and how all those rehearsals worked or didn't work. And the show, as you watch it, it becomes increasingly bizarrely meta in a way that I can only barely describe. If you're interested in these layers, try to find the show about the show.
Well, was there anything in the show Unreal that that sort of was similar to what you learned about the production of Survivor?
Well, if it's the show I'm remembering, everything you see on camera has nothing to do with what's happening off camera. You know, the smiles, the tears, the relationships behind the scenes. Everybody's pretty nasty. Everybody is compromised on some level. The audience member would have to tell me if I'm thinking of the right show, but that's what I recall. A young woman who comes to see how compromised morally she is for doing this show. But why quit a job when you're paid that well? So moral
Yes.
compromise is hard to avoid.
Yes. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to mention before we wrap up?
I don't think so.
All right.
I mean, well, I guess I have to say this. I'm not on all of these social medias, but I do have a static website. So if you look up my name, and I don't Google, I Bing, and I DuckDuckGo. If you DuckDuckGo my name, you will find my website. Nothing much happens on it, but it will tell you about things like this. And I have a blog, a sporadic blog where I post new writing. That's the full extent of my online persona. So.
Well, thank you so much, Sallie. And thank you, Bernard, for joining us for this talk.
Thank you.
For the people at home in the chat, I am posting a link to our YouTube channel, and you can click on that. You can see all of our previous events that we've filmed, and this event will be showing up on our YouTube page probably sometime tomorrow. So if you have friends that you think might enjoy it, share that link with them. And then one more time, also in the chat box, I will post a link to Sallie's great new book. The official release is next Tuesday, but if you click that Powell's link there, we have a pre-order link for you there. So
thank you. I have to say thank you to the people who actually came to this event, because this is not how we want to do readings. This is not our preferred way of meeting. And thank you so much, Bernard, for helping.
It was a pleasure.
So yeah, someday we will all be in a room together.
Hopefully soon. Well, thank you so much again, Sallie. Thanks, Bernard. And thanks for you at home for watching. And tune in again for our next Powell's event, powells.com/events. We'll show you what's coming up with us. Everyone have a good night.
Thanks.
Thanks.